How would you feel if you never accomplished anything grand in your life? To go through your 20s, 30s, 40s, all the way up to death without ever achieving something huge. To many people, that terrifies the life out of them. And sometimes we feel inferior or anxious because we think we need to do something. We feel guilty or frustrated with ourselves when we're not being productive enough in our eyes. And I think in part it's because it's drilled into us either directly or indirectly through the huge amount of online content we consume. And the Blue Lock series takes this exact pressure, dials it up to 11 and puts 300 teenagers through it, showing what happens to the ones who survive and the ones who do not. It is basically an experiment in what unchecked ambition does to people, and the results are not what you would expect. Its leader, Jinpachi Ego, encourages the 300 strikers who'd grown up being taught to essentially be a cog that fits neatly into a machine to instead be more selfish, more ruthless, and above all to pursue what they want instead of taking a safer, more orthodox approach that those around them would approve of. And you can probably see the comparison I'm making here, right? Online, there's pressure to break away from the norm, to ditch the standard life and go all in on something else. And when it comes to Blue Lock, it does wonders for them. Honestly, I think a degree of this is a very good thing. I think a lot of people, likely you included, really do underestimate what they're actually capable of and are potentially quite limited by thinking that they could never achieve anything outside of the ordinary. Many of Blue Lock's players went from complete nobodies to incredible heights. You know, their ambition really pays off as they become professional players. And yet, of course, there's a flip side to it all, because the majority of those 300 strikers will be eliminated, and they'll leave Blue Lock feeling worse than they did entering. They bought into the idea of aiming higher, only to now wrestle with the fact that they would never reach those heights. Arguably, they would have been better off never going, never having these thoughts put into their head. In Jinpachi's own words, this project might mean ruining 299 lives, but from that, one great striker will be born. Now, of course, that's not actually the direction Blue Lock is going anymore, ever since they usurped Japan's national team following their victory against them. The whole whittling down to one player and eliminating the rest just isn't happening anymore. But you see the dilemma I'm putting forward here, right? Some ambition is good, great even, but it can also potentially be dangerous. It can backfire. It can cause people to constantly chase a moving target and never feel satisfied no matter how far they go. To work so hard, succeed so much, and obtain nothing from it but hollowness, regret, and self-hatred that they didn't get even further. They have to distract themselves from it all so they don't lose their mind like we later see with Mick Moon. But of course, it doesn't have to be that way. Enter Shoei Barou, the self-proclaimed king of the pitch who couldn't help but see everyone around him as supporting actors in his story. In his eyes, those who win, those who score goals, are above those who can't. And from the moment he was introduced, he was the absolute pinnacle of Blue Lock's ideas. He has this bottomless ambition. He's so skilled that the strategy just becomes pass to Barou. Him stepping on the pitch changes the dynamic of the entire game. You know, he dedicates every single moment of his life to football, putting himself through insane workouts, you know, stretching, getting himself to bed early. He does everything he possibly can to help improve himself. He'd give it all for football because, in his eyes, if he fails, he's nothing. He's a failure, a lowlife. And I'm going to be talking a lot about shame in this video. And I've spoke a lot about how Barou has a lot of very good habits, right? Part of the reason he's able to perform so insanely well is because he doesn't give in to any vices which could negatively impact him physically or mentally. And I think the number one vice which causes a lot of shame and just a real low self-esteem, you know, is watching porn. And it is extremely hard to quit. You know, I've been here in the past. Unfortunately, like a lot of guys, I got into it when I was younger. And it is very easy to get into this loop of doing it, wishing you hadn't, somehow convincing yourself that you should do it again, right? And to help break that cycle, there's a great app out there called Quitter that you can use to help you as you build that discipline needed to defeat these vices and help yourself succeed. There's a content blocker which will block all core content from entering your phone, so that you don't have to rely on just willpower alone, because obviously that does eventually run out. From my experience, it's very reliable and very low maintenance as well. Once it's up, it just works in the background without you needing to think about it. Of course, those urges still happen, and that's where my favorite feature comes in with the panic button. Anytime you feel an urge, you hit that button, it immediately helps you snap out of it, redirect your focus, and move past the urge without giving in. If you're serious about getting control back, check out the link in the description or the pinned comment. Download Quitter and use my code ANIME to get 3 days for free. Returning to Barou, specifically his future mentor Snuffy, he asks him one of the most thought-provoking questions I've ever heard. Would you still love yourself if you stopped being a prodigy? If it doesn't work out for you or one day you lose it all, would you still see yourself as human? Could you still live life without hating yourself if you never accomplished that huge thing? The other side of all this pressure to reach the top isn't really acknowledged, let alone explored, up until Snuffy's arrival. I'll talk about this in a lot more detail later on because it's one of the most interesting, enlightening stretch of chapters that I've ever read. But for now, Barou isn't the only character who has this mindset of very actively hating themselves when they do fail. We also have Kaiser, another striker Barou's age who grew up having to steal food to survive. Success was quite literally life or death for him. If he didn't succeed at stealing, he was going to starve that day. And that mindset ingrained so deeply into him, it followed him into adulthood even when that was no longer the case. Every time he messed up, he became deeply overcame with self-hatred, to the point where he'd be screaming in rage anytime he made a mistake. There's also Mick Moon, a professional player who made it all the way to the very top of the football world before crashing back down. He was so convinced that a life without his dream wasn't worth living. And so, once he couldn't obtain it anymore, he took his own life. Barou also had a very, very strong start in Blue Lock. He racked up 10 goals in just 4 games, but his first failure almost completely broke him. Let's go back to Blue Lock's second selection, a 3v3 match, and his teammates are people he considers beneath him. But it becomes very clear, very quickly, that Barou is actually the weakest player on the pitch. This is basically a 2v3 with him being dead weight. And Barou, for the first time in his life, gives up his own chance of scoring and passes for someone else to score. This sends him into a downward spiral where he pictures himself hunched over and alone in a dark room, sipping on a cold beer, staring at the TV as he watches Isagi live out his dream in his place, but he's consumed with regrets about what could have been. It's one of the most harrowing sights I've ever seen. You know, it makes me sick to my stomach just imagining that feeling. Now, Barou thinks this will happen because of one pass. And I know that sounds absolutely ridiculous, but it's because, one, he's hit a limit to his abilities for the first time. It's really a big fish who's always lived in a small pond, realizing how big the world really is. And it terrifies him, right? Perhaps understandably so. But point number 2, and one of my very first videos was on this, this is him taking the easier, more comfortable path out of just resignation, out of belief that he can't stand on the stage anymore. He sees it as telling himself it's just a one-time thing, he'll take the easy routes and get back to his normal self, which I think, as we've all experienced, can very, very easily turn into doing it every single time. You know, we've all done it. I'm as guilty as anyone, saying, I'll start tomorrow because I'm tired today, and then tomorrow you say the same thing, and it never actually happens, right? That's what Barou envisions if he passes a second time. Which, okay, fair enough. If he gives up here, instead of trying to find a way through, how can he guarantee that he won't just give up again in future? And what follows with him snapping out of the self-pity he was in to go on a solo run for the winning goal is one of my favourite scenes of all time. It's a brilliant reminder that it is very easy to overly coddle yourself and let yourself out too easily, to the point where down the line you'll massively regret not doing so. And I'll actually come back to, again, Barou's mentor Snuffy in a moment, because I think there's a fair case to be made that he actually tries to overprotect his team, tries to shield them from failure too much to the point where it becomes detrimental to them. But for now, let's consider the absolute worst case scenario here for Barou. He passes, then doesn't go on to become one of the best strikers in the world, but instead just a pretty good professional player. Is that really the end of his life? It's a bit overdramatic, isn't it, right? Does that mean that players who only make it so far, players who had a decent career, played professionally for a few years, but never touched the height Barou is aiming for, should they be beating themselves up for not achieving more? Should they have never been happy with where they reached and continued to set their sights higher? I think this is a bit of a false dichotomy. I think you can be both happy with where you are and continue to aim higher, right? Of course, none of this is to say that I don't think you should try and strive for something. Not at all. I think the mindset of, well, nothing matters, so I'm not going to try, is very unhealthy. It's something I really regret thinking when I was younger, and there is definitely 100% a time to be brutally honest with yourself and acknowledge that if I don't get my shit together soon, or right now even, I'm going to deeply regret this later on. I'm going to hate myself a few years from now. I'm going to wish I just did the damn thing instead of making excuses. Absolutely. There is definitely value in feeling like there's some consequence to losing, and I spoke about that in my Naga video, and Snuffy kind of takes that away from his team initially. He devises incredibly in-depth tactics and asks them to follow them, and says that all the responsibility will fall on him if he loses. He's trying to shield them, but it's something that Barou deeply resents. To him, the chance of glory and corresponding risk of despair are what push him on forwards. And that's totally fine. Again, I think it can be brilliant to start with, but I found that the next level rarely comes from hating yourself more. It rarely comes from beating yourself up that you're not there yet, and it just sucks all the fun out of it without any real benefit. Never comes from being annoyed with yourself that you're not working 24/7 and that you dared to take a break. In fact, on that note, even Barou goes bowling, right? It's his hobby sanctuary that he clearly spends a good amount of time at, given how skilled he is. Even arguably the most driven person in Blue Lock, who does everything he possibly can to progress, understands that there's a limit to how much meaningful work you can do before you're just grinding for the sake of grinding. You're not actually getting better, you're just punishing yourself for the crime of not being perfect yet. As Snuffy says, I think it is extremely important to have an answer to that question. What will you have left if it's taken away from you, if you don't succeed, if you don't make it? The series shows some pretty intense examples of the madness this can drive people to otherwise. Obviously I mentioned Mick Moon earlier, but also Hiyori's parents who won silver Olympic medals, yet let their frustration at not winning gold to cause them to live vicariously through their son, putting him through misery in the hopes that he'd appease their alleged failures. Sounds nuts, but we all kind of do it to an extent, and they couldn't answer that question. They couldn't see themselves as anything beyond their results, but once you can, it is the most freeing feeling in the world. You stop feeling like you have to do something, and you stop hating on yourself for every second where you're not. Instead, you start to become excited about what you get to do. And just from my own experience, that desire to not be a failure, or being annoyed with yourself for not accomplishing or doing anything, it can be a great spark, right? It can be really powerful for getting you going, absolutely. But once you start to make progress, you don't have that anymore. You can't hate yourself for being useless or doing nothing because that's no longer the case. However, the next time you hit a wall, because hatred got you this far, you look for the next way that hate can fuel you. And that just ends up being, well, now I should hate myself for not being better than I currently am. Every second you don't spend working starts to feel like a failure, something you should be guilty of. And it doesn't actually get you anywhere. It doesn't help you be more productive. Obviously, the exact balance will vary a lot for everyone, and I do think some degree of challenge and struggle is needed to get anywhere with something. But the issue arises when you think you should be struggling just for the sake of it. When you can't acknowledge that things are kind of supposed to get easier as you get better, or you can't acknowledge the progress you've made and continue to hate yourself for not making more. Barou is someone clearly at the more extreme end of that spectrum, right? He still thinks to himself that if he loses here, the world will laugh at him and his life will fall into pieces. But I think in spite of that, he knows that it wouldn't really be the end of the line for him. Yeah, it'd suck, but he'd find a way back, right? And that's why Snuffy's retirement irritates him so much. He sees it as Snuffy running in fear after what happened to Mick, not wanting to stay in the arena or be ambitious again because he's seen what it can do to people. He's kind of forgotten the excitement of it all on the other side. That a pursuit can be one of excitement and not a battle against feeling inferior. And on that note, when we later fully exit the Blue Lock bubble, where Jinpachi Ego was always right, and we instead start to see other countries' teams' philosophies, Isugi encounters a player called Hugo who's just outright better than him. He's more ambitious than him, and yet he has a completely different philosophy to the one Jinpachi drilled into him. He goes as far as to put forward the idea that Jinpachi has brainwashed them all with his philosophy, even though it might not be what's best for all of them beyond that initial spark. Hugo didn't need to be told that comfort is the enemy or that he had to shed the idea of being a team player to unlock something greater. He's driven, exceptional, and yet his relationship with the game looks completely different to Isugi or Barou's. It doesn't seem like he'd lose his mind if he fell slightly short. Him and other players like Bachara represent the possibility that you can want it just as badly, work just as hard, without being driven by hatred towards yourself. You know, that hunger and peace aren't mutually exclusive. Because above all, no matter how high you climb, if you still hate yourself at the top, you haven't actually won anything.